Okay, cool. So yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for making the time. So today we're talking about this concept of selling with empathy. The idea is born out of the fact that clearly 2020 has been a pretty challenging time, and COVID has hit businesses in a number of different ways. So when we're trying to sell our products and services to different businesses, we need to ensure that we're doing so with empathy and just take a few different steps to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers, and put a bit of structure around selling in a way that doesn't kind of burn any bridges, but also in a way that is effective and helps your customers to come to conclusions around things in a sensitive way. So helping people to make decisions, but doing it in the right way, because it's slightly different these days. So obviously, today we've got Luke, who you all know, and then I'm sort of running through the majority of this content here. So I'm at HubSpot. I work very closely with the team at Modern Visual in a number of different ways, but them being a HubSpot partner means I'm very, very closely aligned to them. Throughout the session, I'm going to ask a few questions. There's a pretty small group on today, so as we go, we might chuck a few questions. In fact, we may not even need to use the question pane. You can just take yourselves off mute and ask away at the intervals when we look for a couple of questions. And we shouldn't, definitely won't be going beyond 3, so we won't keep you beyond the hour. So we're going to cover 2 key items. So one is thinking about the psychology of sales in uncertain times, which we are certainly in at the moment. And then also just sort of a mini framework to think about when we're selling through and post COVID-19. So to start off with the psychology of selling in uncertain times, we've broken this down into a couple of key areas and to think about, I guess, yourselves, but also your prospects and customers as well. It's thinking about their businesses and the personal impacts that this can have on people. Because even though you're dealing with businesses, ultimately when you're selling your products and services, you're speaking to people. So on the left here, where my mouse is just hovering around about now, this is the stages that people go through during a crisis. So we've got 5 stages. Obviously, the first stage is that there's no sign of a crisis. Stage 2 is warning. So I'm going to say that was probably about February, March last year. And then stage 3, a crisis point, where whatever's happening in the world starts to show harmful effects on business, which would be around March, April, and then beyond for Australia. Obviously, it's extended maybe a little bit in Victoria versus where I'm in New South Wales, for example. But there's still very many businesses that I'm seeing across Australia, whether they're in Victoria, New South Wales, Adelaide, whatever, that are still suffering the effects of COVID. And very much still in this stage 3. And then stage 4, we have our recovery, where we're starting to recover to some semblance of normal, whatever normal is moving forward. And then post-crisis is where we can actually take a step back. I don't think anyone's in stage 5 yet. We're not in stage 5, I don't think, until we get a vaccine, and we can start moving on with our lives outside of thinking about COVID all the time. But yeah, very much businesses that we're speaking to at the moment will very much be in stage 3 or stage 4, where they are experiencing harmful effects or they're on their way out. Different businesses are suffering in different ways, which I'll come on to in a sec, which is also worth bearing in mind. And then on the right here, we've got the personal impacts of stress or crisis. This Kubler-Ross grief cycle is something that some of you may be familiar with. It was a study that was undertaken in the 60s, I think, by a German doctor about cancer patients. And they studied the journey that people went through when they heard this bad news. And this aligns with the journey that people are going through at the moment personally with their businesses in COVID. So we go through this denial, we go through anger, frustration, we go through depression where we're feeling overwhelmed, helpless. We then get through to this bargaining stage, so struggling to find meaning, reaching out to others, telling a story, and then there's acceptance. So starting to move on with finding solutions and exploring options for moving forward. The key takeaway just from this slide really is that blue bar along the bottom that you can see here is how we should be dealing with these people in these different stages. So when we talk about selling with empathy, what we want to be doing is when we're speaking to prospects and customers is trying to put them and understand them, put them into a different bucket almost. I mean, do we get a sense that perhaps they're here, they're feeling helpless and there's no way out? I can think of plenty of conversations I've had with business owners over the last year where people have been in that position. And clearly if they're here and I start giving them guidance and direction, that's completely the wrong way to deal with them. I need to give them support, empathize with their situation, and probably not offer or try to sell them anything that I'm offering at the moment. Similarly, if I give them information and communication and they're feeling they're in this depression down curve, then they're just piling on the negativity on top. So very important to understand where that person or where that business is at as well, and then aligning our communication with those different levels that they're at within that group cycle. You may have come across these terms before. So we've got some general industry positions. So throughout this crisis or throughout this the pandemic that we've had with COVID and throughout any sort of disruption, whether that's the recession in 2009, people are going to go into one of these three buckets. One is survive. People are going to sort of really could be specifically struggling due to the impact of the lockdowns, the restrictions that have been put in place, things like that. And there's some example industries you can see here. Travel's obviously been impacted very heavily. Events, anything to do with brick and mortar restaurants and so on, they've been impacted fairly severely. So the idea is to, if you're trying to sell to businesses like this, tread lightly, maybe even possibly avoid trying to sell to them at this point in time. We have the adapt businesses. This is where the vast majority of businesses that we see are sitting in at the moment. So they've been impacted, but not completely, not impacted to the point where the business is at risk of going under or they're not making money for months on end. So they will need to typically make investments, but they're not going to be going too heavily into making business decisions at this point in time. So what we want to focus on with these ones, and again, this should be the majority of the businesses that we deal with, focus on risk mitigation. So focus on what's the problem now, and help them to deal with what's happening now rather than sort of selling things that are going to help them in a year's time, and even thinking about helping them avoid sort of selling these against like a dream of where something's going to be in 2 years' time. We need to focus on what the problem is right now and then align our solutions and our services to exactly what that problem is today. And then finally, we have these growing businesses. Lucky them. I mean, there's obviously a few examples of those flying around. A lot of businesses that are online. If you're selling hand sanitizer, your business probably went through the roof in March, April. But suddenly people were very interested in e-learning, or IT did very well, for example, because people started working from home and people needed to adapt the situation to that. So IT companies and people selling home office equipment, all of those sort of businesses were in high demand. And these sort of businesses, if there still are businesses that are booming out the back of this and doing very well. So for them, it's all a case of like, well, you can almost sell, Zoom, for example, had technical issues when suddenly everyone started using it. They had scalability problems. So for businesses like this, where they've suddenly taken off overnight, we need to focus on how can we give them value as quickly as possible and give them scalability with what they're doing. So how can we're still dealing with the problems they have now, but it's a conversation about growth rather than thinking about how can we stop the impact of what's going on now. So across these two slides here, it's just good to take a step back, and when you're speaking to a customer, when you're speaking to a prospective customer, is to try and work out which stage they're at. When you're asking a couple of questions, which I'll come on to in a minute, where do they sit within that brief cycle, and make sure we align our communication appropriately to where they're at. This slide kind of aligns to what I was just talking about there in terms of when we typically sell. I mean, the simplest way that I can think about sales as something that we do, all you're pretty much doing is you're taking someone's current state, where they are today, and then where they want to be in X amount of time. Could be a year, could be 3, could be 5. And then we're plugging that hole and that gap, if there's a gap there, with our solution, whether it's a product or a service, current state to future, and then filling that gap with something that helps them get to that dream state. That's how most people sell their services. The problem that we have at the moment is a lot of people are just very much focused on survival. We talked about that middle tier, the people in the adapt phase. They're focusing on risk mitigation. they're not necessarily going to make purchasing decisions based off what we're going to help them achieve in a year or two's time. What we need to focus on there is what's happening at the moment. And there's been a whole bunch of studies that have gone into the effectiveness of selling to people using what we call cost of inaction or loss aversion. Cost of inaction is a very salesy term, but loss aversion. To use a really simple analogy, if I'll tell a bit of a story. So if someone was to walk up to you and give you $5,000, you'd be pretty pleased. I'd be pretty delighted if someone gave me $5,000. If my boss gave me $5,000 out of nowhere, I'd be pretty pleased. However, if someone came up to me and said, I'm going to take that, I'm going to give you $5,000, I'm going to dock $5,000 from your pay and not give me a reason for it, or take $5,000 from you, the emotions that you'd feel when someone takes something from you is going to be a lot stronger than when you've gained something. Similar example might be if it's a hot day and in one hand I've got a cold beer. Everyone likes a cold beer on a hot day. And on the other hand, someone's just put a very, very hot iron onto my hand. I'm going to remove my hand from the iron because it hurts, even though I really want that nice cold beer. That's a bit of a funky analogy, but we're hardwired to avoid pain. So when we're trying to sell, rather than selling on the future state of someone, of what we're going to help them to achieve in moving forward, we should be focusing on what are the problems right now? What is it costing the business right now? And what do they need to be doing to avoid that? That's what's going to help drive people to make decisions faster. And if you can get your products and services to align to solving some of the problems that people are solving now and tweak how you're positioning it, you should find that you have a higher close rate and a more impactful sales process.
Tom, what's your opinion on some businesses are selling items that are nice to have for a consumer, and maybe there's something where people aren't feeling great, so they want to mitigate that with actually feeling great. So, bringing in a product that makes them feel good. Is that something to consider here as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. Depends on what you're selling though, doesn't it? I guess I struggle to think of an example of something that if you're down in the dumps, I guess as a business, I guess it depends on what you're selling. If I'm selling, for some reason I've got a golf tee on my desk, I don't know why. If I'm into golf, I might buy a cheap bit of golf equipment to make me feel a bit better. Yes. But if I'm thinking of selling like large, I don't know what all the people on this call sell, but I use you as an example. I'm not going to buy marketing services because I want to feel better. I'm going to buy marketing services because if I don't take on your services, I may continue to lose money because my systems aren't up to scratch, or because I'm missing out on an opportunity to launch a campaign with my clients around what's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I'm thinking someone like Adam that's on the call who sells outdoor kitchens and alfrescos. I believe he's been busier than ever, and that's obviously people looking at making themselves feel better with a new purchase potentially through. Adam, I'd love your input on why people are buying at the moment as well. But I guess that's something to consider.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'd imagine that, Adam, because of the position that you're in, people are suddenly at home. They want to spend a bit more time on developing their kitchen. So
yeah. No, I think there is a bit of that. I think what we're seeing is, we normally have a strong end of the year leading up to Christmas anyway, with the whole I need to have my barbecue working on Christmas Day sort of situation. But I think this year's been a little bit different because of the whole COVID situation. I think because people can't travel and they may have put aside money for holidays or things like that. They're sitting at home, they're looking at their backyard quite a bit, and they're spending that money on improving their outdoor space. We're seeing that, a lot of that. And an interesting side effect of the whole COVID thing is people have been a lot more tolerant this year. Like if we're telling people it just can't be done by Christmas or whatever the case might be, it's just accepted as a rule, which normally it's not the case. It's an interesting time.
Yeah, it's interesting. So many different businesses that we speak to are just pushed in so many different directions. There's a bit of a pattern to it, but outdoor kitchens, I wouldn't have thought of that as something that would have been, but now I think about it, it makes sense. Yeah. Brilliant. I think even with the outdoor kitchens, in terms of running a sales process, and not to, I don't know what your sales process looks like and what your success rate looks like. I would imagine if people are asking for an outdoor kitchen, it's not something they take lightly. So people are probably fairly serious about doing it, which means I'd imagine your close rate's pretty decent. Thinking about that dream state, they dream about this kitchen in the garden. But if you delve deep enough into why someone wants it, it's because maybe they want the memories with their family, their kids, their grandchildren, and they want them in time for Christmas. And if someone's talking to me about timing, we want it in time for Christmas, I might be asking questions around, well, what happens if we don't get it in time for Christmas? Yeah. Just so that I understand what the impact is of cost of inaction. Obviously, you want to use that with the right tone and not make people feel like crap. But coming from where the selling software, which I've done for a number of years, and thinking about Luke's services as well, people will often put off decisions because that's what humans do. But unless we ask the questions about what the cost is of putting off those decisions, they don't often think about it. So those questions can be quite helpful just to help people come to their own conclusions about their own timelines to get started.
Great. Yep.
Cool. So we've got this idea of being like empathetic, which is what we're broadly talking about today. So obviously, regardless of what you're selling, I've worked in an office for the last 3 years at HubSpot, and now suddenly I've been working from this spare room. When I'm speaking to people on Zoom, they're all working from their spare room. So there's always that conversation where you can empathize about, working from home. I don't have kids, but I can see children running around, and you can connect with someone about the fact that we're all going through the same thing, and empathize with the difficulties that everyone's going through. So just taking that extra time just to talk through things like that with a client, which I'm sure you guys will do anyway, is a pretty powerful way to build a bond, and also just make sure that they see you as someone who's a human looking to help them, rather than someone that's just trying to ram a product or a service down the throat. A key thing with this, though, is to think about selling with empathy versus sympathy. So it's like I say here, it's a subtle but a pretty important difference. If I think back in particular to March and April time, most conversations you had, with people, they started off pretty doom and gloom, because we didn't know what was going on. It's pretty scary. There's a lot of businesses that were heavily impacted. But what we want to try and do is almost make ourselves objective to that. So we want to acknowledge the fact that people are going through troubles, but not get pulled into going along with that worst case and that doomsday chat, because then we can't be objective. We're someone else who's struggling with them. To use an analogy, if we just imagine you're walking over a bridge, over a river, it's a really fast river, and you look down and you see that there's someone who's in the water. They're struggling. They're in real trouble, right? The empathetic person would find that those rubber rings, flotation rings, chuck them in, call the police, call the ambulance service, or whatever's needed to get them out of trouble. And by being on the bridge and doing that, they remain objective to the situation. They're able to help. The sympathetic person, which might be seen as the heroic person, I don't want to get into a debate about what any of us would do in the situation and choosing it as an analogy. The sympathetic person might jump in with the person in the river and try and save them. So then they've got themselves in trouble as well, and they can no longer be objective. It's then just a massive fight, and there's no objectivity. That's the word I want you to think about, is objectivity. They can't really help now. They're just helping the other person and themselves survive. So when we talk about being empathetic, we want to help people, but we don't want to get dragged into, we want to understand the situation, talk about it, but we don't necessarily have to agree with all of the doom and gloom that they're talking about if you don't agree with it, because that removes you as someone who's able to actually give advice and be objective about it. So that's the difference between them being empathetic and sympathetic. I hope that analogy made a bit of sense. By being objective, they can look to you for support and guidance and direction, rather than someone who's then just sort of complaining about the current situation. Yeah. In terms of understanding the challenges, we've got a bit of a framework here. So this is an old, fairly well-known sort of sales framework for objection handling. So if someone says, this is just a great tip anyway, just for anything in your sales process where people throw up objections. Too expensive. I might think I'm going to go and think about it, or do you know what, I did say I wanted to get started this week, but I've put back the project till January. This layer is a really, really useful model to help yourselves get to the root cause of the issue or the objection. A lot of people, when they say something's too expensive, or they need to think about it, or the timing's not quite right, it's a bit of a cover for something else. It's just the human nature just to throw something up and not give the real reason straight away. So this framework's built to uncover the reasons behind the reason, and then allow you to tackle those so that you're actually tackling the right problems. So listen to their objection, acknowledge it. So show that you've heard them. So you can summarize what you've heard. So it sounds like this is what you're experiencing right now. And ask a couple of questions, so open-ended questions. Can you tell me a bit more about that? What made you come to that conclusion? How are you feeling about that? What's causing that? Listen. Ooh, excuse me. You can listen and go around until you get to the core issue. And then only when you've done that, an appropriate number of times, have you listened, have you explored what they're saying to you, then you can respond. It does two things. One, what I was talking about earlier, you get to the core root of the problem. Our natural reaction is if someone says, I can't do X, or the price is too high, our natural reaction is to go, no, it's not, and try and solve it straight away. But then all you're doing is butting heads with that person. You're also not getting to the root cause of the problem, which is what I was saying earlier. Get to the root cause of the problem. And then secondly, you're building trust as well. If you're talking to someone and you're asking them questions about the situation, open-ended questions, you're listening, you're summarizing what you've learned, they know that you're listening to them. And there comes to this sort of tipping point in the conversation where you can see that once they know that you're not there just to run solutions and services and trying to sell things, you're there to help them, then they're going to be more open to your perspective and your point of view. So like I say, this is a framework for objection handling. Very much I'd use this when you're dealing with people who perhaps are struggling at the moment, just to understand a little bit more about their situation before you go in and provide advice, because no one likes unsolicited or advice that isn't well thought out, because then it just feels like it's self-centered from the person who's offering it. So that's a handy little framework layer. I'll definitely adopt that if you've not come across this before and in everything. I mean, this even comes in handy at home, in everyday life. I'm getting married next year. My fiance, I use this layer on her quite a lot, unknowing to her, and it works wonders because people like to be listened to when they have objections about certain things. Cool. All right. So we've got a little, just to summarize the first half of the meeting here. We've got a couple of key things we covered. So loss aversion is very important. So what do they need to be doing now to avoid the problems that they're having right now? We talked about identifying where someone is in terms of that crisis stage and their personal, the personal journey that they're going through as they deal with these difficulties that they're going through at the moment, and then aligning what we provide to them with that. We've got the general industry positions. So thinking about, before you speak to someone, have a think about what we think they might be going through as an industry as a whole. Should we be trying to, should we avoid them and just kind of empathize with them, or should we be trying to help them with the problem they have now, or helping them scale different things? And then we have this layer here, which, like I say, is for objection handling, but also a really good way just to offer advice on what businesses are going through and the means of building trust. So that's the first half we've gone through. I mean, there's not too many of us on here, but I would love anyone to tap in any sort of helpful things that they've learned, comments, even if you disagree with me on any points, chuck them in. Any questions? Yeah, so if there's anything that you've considered so far helpful, or if you've thought of any customers in specific situations at the moment, then yeah, we'd love to hear about it in the chat panel, or just take yourself off mute and chuck them out myself and look.
It was interesting to have a look at the various stages that graph that I think the first one, the second one you put up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And my initial reaction was, it would be interesting to speculate where the American US population is in that cycle. And I say that because of the, COVID in the US is just out of control. Mm. And there are a lot of people who, for whatever reason, mostly I think ignorance, don't really give a shit. But there are those, particularly, and obviously those that are, have had relatives die as a result of COVID. Their response would be totally different. But as I thought about it, the States, I also thought about Australia, because we have people in this country who are denying it for whatever reason. But I don't. My customers are internal, so I don't deal with the outside world all that much. But I've enjoyed this. I think I get what you mean in the difference between sympathy and empathy. And I think it's, we're hearing a lot about it from leaders in the world. Well, are we hearing a lot of it? We're hearing Biden say what he has to say. You've got Jacinda Ardern, to some degree, Scott Morrison. Certainly, it's the total opposite from Trump. Anyway, I'm waffling on here. I appreciate the presentation. I found it good. Puts a few things in perspective for me, and I would hope that we can see many more of these, Luke and Tom. I'm done.
Sorry, I dropped out for a little bit then because my internet's playing fun. So there you go, this COVID situation for me.
That explained the look on your face.
What was it, just like this?
I think you had the presentation goes, but anyway, go on.
All good. What's going on with this? Is it still working? Yes. So that was the first half, and the second half is just to give you a bit of a framework around how you can actually use this, which will be a bit shorter than part one. Did anyone else have any sort of questions, comments before we move on to that?
It's all been pretty straightforward, Tom, from what I've seen so far. So I feel like the framework is probably going to add a bit more context to what you've already presented.
Cool. It's a pretty simple framework that I want you to think about. So when we're opening a conversation with someone, even if they've come to us, let's try and identify, first to start to check in on them, identify our approach, explain how we can help, determine their priorities, and then deal with those objections, which is what I'm going to run through now. So this is this here, checking in, is what's going to help us to then identify where they are, or get close to where they are potentially within that cycle that we've been talking about. So we all know that there's stuff going on at the moment that's going to impact businesses and people in different ways. So, ask them the question, how have your business been affected by what's happened this year? What has the impact been on that personally? And, you know, again, you could even talk a little bit about your own experiences without getting into the river, so to speak, with them. I think just, you know, talk about your own experiences just to help build that bit of rapport with them, and just a bit of credibility as a trusted advisor as well. Obviously, use open-ended questions and respond with empathy without sort of imposing your own feelings. So checking in is going to help you then gauge where they're at, and you can change the way in which you handle the rest of the conversation. And then, like I say, you know, once we've done that, we can identify our approach. So like I was just talking about there, you know, you can damage your relationship if you try to sell at the wrong time. If they are clearly not in the position to consider taking on products and services, then perhaps what they need is just a bit of education, even just emotional support. And we've got to trust that all of the good things that we do in business and in life come back and kind of pay us back. Something that we talk a lot about at HubSpot is, you know, we have annual sales targets as well as monthly sales targets, but don't lose sight of the fact if you help people now right away, it tends to come back to you later on. So by building trust and building credibility now, you're sowing seeds for the future. It's no point in burning relationships and upsetting people by misaligning your approach with where they're feeling emotionally at the moment, given what's gone on at the moment. Similarly, by the same token, as you can see in the bottom paragraph there, if you go in too deep with the doom and gloom about what's going on at the moment, some people might be absolutely on fire, and all you're doing then is adding doubt potentially if you're not sure about it. So, you know, just gauge where someone's at before you probably start talking about things too heavily yourself is, I guess, the key takeaway there. Explain how your business can help. So, you know, this is I've put how HubSpot partners help, basically how modern visual helps companies, because I have to use an example. But have a think about, if you haven't already, think about how your business can help companies right now. So this is a list that a business like Modern Visual would have on hand, ready to use. This is something that HubSpot, for example, for us, put together a bunch of resources for people who speak to our customers like me, on how we can help them right now, just to tweak the way in which we approached our conversation. So if this isn't something you've done just yet, having a think about how you can actually help businesses given the current situation, and be ready for that conversation will help you to have more fruitful conversations overall. And ask them about the priorities as well. So obviously, once you've got an idea of where you can help, you can slowly guide your questions around these key areas. So asking questions about what priorities are right now, but also even thinking about things like storytelling. So for example, if I was in Luke's shoes, you know, I might be speaking to a company and I say, well, look, I know, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, that you used to run a whole bunch of events. Clearly, that's something that's not been able to happen this year. What we've been working on with a lot of different companies is reallocating that budget to virtual events. Is that something that you've considered? Or how do you feel about that? So the idea is just have those questions ready and be ready just to guide people into certain areas with things that you can help with, because they may not have thought about them as solutions. Try to avoid the yes and no questions as always, because people just want to say no to everything at the moment. So try and think of, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Have you thought about the impact of this? Things like that. And that will help you just to get people talking. You'll find more information, you'll build more trust, and you'll be able to focus down on those specific problems and challenges that you're able to actually help with. And then finally, we want to isolate objections. So I talked about the layer thing earlier. Be patient, listen to them, ask some questions, get more information before you respond, or before you start to, you know, a natural reaction might be there's a fear hits you, then you might lose a deal and you might start offering concessions and say, well, do you know what, we can look at the price and give you a special price because of what's going on at the moment. It might not actually be the price that they're worried about, and you're just damaging your credibility. So take the time to understand exactly where those objections come from, and you'll be in a better spot. You can preempt objections as well. So given what's gone on at the moment, you can probably So that if there are objections that come up around your sales process, it's going to be around one of these. So there's no time because they're running around trying to solve other problems. The budget's been frozen, cash flow constraints, need an out clause because they're uncertain about the future. So get those documented almost. Think about if someone was to say that to you, how could you help them around this problem? Once you've gone through and asked questions about it and you've discovered that this is the problem, then how could we actually address those? Just be prepared. Just an example here that we've typed out. So someone told you they've got no time. There's an example you might use. So I understand this is a busy time right now. And then I might ask a question. What are the immediate, this is if I'm in Luke's shoes, by the way, selling marketing services, I should add. So I understand this is a busy time right now. What are the immediate campaigns that are taking priority? For example, I spoke to a company yesterday who needed to get urgent COVID-19 communication out to their customers. And I prepared a needs analysis summary for them to share with their team and expedite approval to get the campaign launched. So what we've done there with the offer is we've given them a needs analysis which focuses on the loss aversion. So we're focusing on things that need to get done now to avoid a negative impact on the business. I'm not going in, I'm not selling this grand new website and shiny new digital marketing strategy. I'm going in there to take down or to offer assistance on areas that are going to have an immediate impact. And if it's, by not doing that, there's going to be a negative impact on the business. So have a think about those, and like I say, have those things ready to handle with the loss of, aligned to the loss aversion that we talked about earlier, so that you can preempt objections. And then even have a backup play where perhaps you offer something free or low investment or low commitment that will still help them, but get them nurtured along the way to becoming a full customer down the line. So if there's sort of free or lower cost services that can be provided just to get people started, then maybe have those as a backup plan. Cool. Well, absolutely whizzed through that because I was conscious of time. So yeah, final little section, just if there was any sort of final questions or reflections. I'd love to hear if there's any playbooks you could put together to help yourselves, or if you have sales reps at this time, or if there's any new services that you're thinking of offering or could be offering your customers, as well as if there is a significant objection that comes through at this time, you know, what is it? And maybe we could even talk about that in the 5-10 minutes that we have left.
Hey, Chris, I'd be keen to learn from yourself. Obviously, you have you know, your end user customer, but would this be handy for negotiating with your suppliers and stuff like that?
Negotiating with suppliers.
Yes. Not just negotiating, but looking at those relationships you have with suppliers, and even, you know, larger commercial customers you might have as well. Are most of your customers, because I believe you guys work with, you know, a very well-known electric car business. You know, is there other, I guess, customers that would benefit from, you know, having this in place from your end?
Look, there's no doubt whether it's a supplier or, if you like, what I'll term an external customer. I mean, you can see the psychology in all of this, and if you do it well, as Tom has said, both you and your supplier or customer are going to profit. Simple as that in my mind.
Perfect. Adam, what about yourself? How do you find that your sales process has evolved to become? Do you feel like you're using this model as part of your process?
It's evolved through COVID by, I think we do a lot more pre-qualification now before we actually spend the time to go out and visit site. The other thing we do more now is actually spend a lot more time working on the design of the outdoor kitchen without actually talking about price until the end. And it seems to have worked really well, as long as clients kind of know what their sort of ballpark situation is. What we've found is if we spend the time up front getting the design right, sending it back to them, making adjustments. What we used to do is we'd just go bang with a quote. There you go. Here's what I've done for you, and here's how much it's going to be. I guess we've kind of drawn out the process a little bit, but I think we get better buy-in because of it. So we send the design back to them. Please make any changes before we sort of cost it up for you, and then it seems to have worked really well. So we're doing a lot more work pre-site visit than we used to do. So when we're getting to site now, it's generally to check that the dimension's right, that there's no surprises, and to choose colours. So it feels like we're being a lot more efficient, even though we've kind of extended the process, if that makes sense. It's a little bit of an oxymoron. We're extending the process, but become more efficient. But that's what it feels like. It feels like we're more engaged with the client before we even get out there, and it's just saving us a lot of time on site. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, and it's almost like you're doing that blueprint prior to even moving forward. So you know that you've got their commitment that they are probably going to do something with you. It's not just, I guess, someone dreaming through the process and then something might not move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And it's it's working really, really well.
Yeah, awesome. No, that's good to hear.
The key for me, and what Adam said, is engagement with the customer.
Are you saying you're financial kitchen, Chris?
And that's part of relationship building, and it is part of, and not overtly, but I suppose in a different way, part of being empathetic to their needs as well.
Yep. Adam, how have you handled the whole COVID side of things? As in, have you not done site visits for a number of months while COVID's there? Or I think you would have been adapting to virtual, looking at people's backyards through Zoom or something like that, or FaceTime?
Yeah, we did. Yeah. So we had, there were two ways we kind of went about it. For people who were comfortable with Zoom, we did that, and they'd take us on a tour of their backyard, and it was a little bit of a novelty, and it was pretty cool. That worked well. And then the other one was if they didn't have time for a Zoom meeting or whatever, then it was a email an image of the space, a dimension, and what you want in it, and we start the process from there. And both worked really well. And we're doing more of that now than actually sort of booking ourselves out and running around half of Melbourne, sort of wasting a lot of time, to be honest. So yeah, it's certainly changed the way we do things.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because we're to be honest the same, where a lot of people from the previous generations wanted to have the handshake meeting, and Zoom wasn't even something they wanted to look at. Whereas because they've now been forced to use it, we've found our business has become quite more efficient as well, where you could have 10 meetings in a day instead of 2 or 3, just because the travel's taken out of it, and even the level of energy required is less in a Zoom, compared to sort of that big drive out to see someone. So I think, as unfortunate as the pandemic's been, it's actually changed a lot of things for the good.
Yeah, I agree, mate. Absolutely. And the other thing is that the ones who are getting us out, we know are serious about it, or a bit more serious about it as well. So, it's been a journey.
There you go. Did anyone have any more specific questions for Tom while we've got access to Tom?
I don't think so. I kind of associate with that whole trusted advisor terminology and language, because that's what we've tried to be, in that, because we're a niche kind of offering in a bigger space, sort of within the cabinet making industry. We've tried to be that trusted advisor and learn as much as we can about compliance and regulations as well as design. So that kind of resonates with me, being that person. And we've got sales off people who hadn't even considered us, where we've just helped them. We've just helped them without having a sale at the end of it, on jobs they've done themselves, where they've put things in and we've advised them not to do that because it's against a regulation or it's non-compliant, and they've just rung up for advice, and then we've been referred on. So that all ties back to that whole trusted advisor empathy kind of kind of subject that you guys are talking about here today. So it's worked really well for us.
Yeah, fantastic. What we might start to wrap up the webinar, but what we'll do, we'll send out a copy of this to everyone that's attended, and we'll also look at converting this into a podcast and creating some other cool content as well. So keep an eye out for future webinars. We're definitely going to be running a number of these on a regular basis moving forward, and would love your participation in future webinars. So thanks again for joining us, and Tom, I'm not sure if you want to add to that.
No, all good. Thanks. Nice to meet you guys. Thanks for joining. Appreciate it.
No worries.
All good.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a good day, everyone, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
See you, everyone. Bye.